everybody. How's it going today? I'm at a Starbucks because I forgot I had an orthodontist appointment like right after the call. So today's Lawless Live is not only going to be a different topic, or I should say live with Laurie, than what I had originally planned and proposed to talk about playgroups, but I also have to go to the dentist like right after this. But yeah, so we had originally planned to talk about common mistakes made in playgroups, which is a very important topic, and I do really want to talk about that. But as some of you who have been following me in the Facebook group saw that I got kind of thrown into a situation this week, and I posted a little bit about it in the group. I posted a little bit about it on my personal page, and at the end of the day, it was really an emergency sheltering situation. And I thought that not only am I a little fired up about it, but I also think not only is it an important thing to think about and consider with all of our shelters, and how they all operate so differently, is that there is our plans and what does that plan look like, but also some learning lessons from this. I think it's a big eye opener of what can go well and what can go wrong. So when things are happening on the fly, I do think it's kind of a good way well, it's kind of in the moment to talk about it. So I did move the Laurie Live about play groups to 2 weeks from now. So we are going to be able to talk about that. I had actually been planning to go on a spay neuter trip that was canceled, unfortunately. So I have 2 more weeks of Lori lives that I can do now that just popped up on my calendar. So yeah, I thought maybe let's just bump that one and we can talk today about emergency sheltering and some of the important pieces of that. So as we get going, got a Hillary coming in. So yeah, so if this is your first time, Casey, Trish, I know you're here often, but just for folks who may watch this post recording, and which yes, I also know I have not yet I finally edited it yesterday, but I have not posted yesterday's or last week's live due to some of the chaos over the last few weeks, or the past few days. But yeah, so for those who are going to be watching this in its edited form, I am Laurie Lawless, and I am the owner of Shelter Behavior Integrations. And one of the things that I founded this for was to help shelters create proactive strategies to addressing behavior challenges in shelters and utilizing daily systems such as cleaning, playgroups, veterinary care, all of those things to help us document, observe, and create pathways forward trajectories for animals in our care, utilizing all behavioral data. In general, I'm a big proponent of proactive strategies and having things planned out. I don't know if it's just because of who I am, my childhood, all of the things I've seen and witnessed, but I really like to have an idea of like what the worst case scenario may be and then plan for that and hope that everything else is going to be better. So this is what happened this week is a really good example of that. And so I will just kind of dive right into short as I can a recap. And then we're going to talk about what we can do to prevent chaos when we get a call or have to respond out to something that is not within our normal parameters of what we're dealing with in the shelter. So I got home. Let's see. So yeah, I'm like, it'll be a short story, so I'll keep it short. If somebody yell at me in the comments if I'm dragging on too long, because I do want to get to the proactive stuff. So basically, I was out last week. I was in Colorado. I was working with a shelter, having a great time, decompressing from that a little bit Friday, and trying to make plans to do something with my partner this past weekend. And Saturday afternoon, I get a text message from our local animal control with a bunch of people I don't know on it asking for some assistance with coming to walk and feed some dogs that were from a property in a town nearby. And we, of course, were having very freezing weather, like many of you, over the weekend. And our game wardens gave our animal control officer, this is what I found out later, so I'm just recapping, gave our local animal control officer, who don't have any law enforcement capabilities, but are sort of depending on where in the state, which is a larger issue, find a place for dogs. So they gave them an hour's notice and said, we're getting 8 German Shepherds off of this property. So I don't know any of that information. I just get a message saying like, hey, can you help? And they were being housed about a mile and a half from my house. And I said, yeah, sure, I can come in and like help and feed and walk dogs. And I specifically had asked like 8 German Shepherds, they came from Sydney's backyard, not a great situation. Do I need more supplies? Like, do we need safety tools? Because I have them all at the shelter locally here. I store them there for when I need them because usually not a lot happens near me. And that's a half an hour in the opposite direction. So I was like, do you need me to get my tools? And they were like, oh, no, they don't really like being on the leash, but it'll be fine. And, I could have at that point taken it as a red flag, but my boyfriend was like wanted to go get lunch and anyway, right. So I'm like, all right, I'm just not gonna go too far. I'm over exaggerating, I'm overthinking it. So anyway, I show up on Saturday night. It was a total disaster. The holding facility or the location that was the only one that could take in 8 dogs was a woman who has a small boarding operation behind her house. But it's made out of homemade materials. So what we're looking at are maybe 3x4 wooden structures with like 2x4s and plywood with like a hole in the front with some chain link, right? And so there was 4 German Shepherds in those, and then there was 4 German Shepherds in like what would be like a large crate, but they were all kind of hitting the tops of them. And so when I got there, I was expecting to walk into something, I don't know. But what happened was there was nothing other than food, that these dogs had. They hadn't been able to get taken out of their kennel. One had bitten somebody already. The dogs that were in the wire crates were actually grabbing the bars and kind of pulling them inwards. One of them was bleeding from the mouth. One of them was climbing up and trying to get out of the top of the kennel, and they had put some plywood on top, and he had started biting on the plywood. And so I immediately recognized this was a very unsafe situation happening on the hill and a half down the street from my house. And I am the only one in the immediate area with any experience in it. The handler, I'm trying to get information from the woman whose place this is. She's completely overwhelmed. She had given the dog some water at some point, but they knocked all the water bowls over. So they hadn't really had any water for 24 hours. It was just kind of a disaster. So I kind of went into, okay, triage. I tried to get one dog out, got it out after about 20 minutes because that was the one that had bitten the person, the animal control officer, when he was trying to put her in a crate and take the leash back off. So I didn't have my catch pole or anything. So slowly was able to get a leash, was able to get the dog out of the crate, got the dog outside. She's alligator rolling. There was like a hole in the building for some reason. So she tried to climb into the wall, just incredibly under-socialized dogs who happen to be about 70 to 80 pounds apiece. So I decided we all needed to leave, and I made that executive decision and said, I call the animal control officer, and these are the tools that I have. So the next morning, my partner and I woke up and went in, and from there, it was just trying to keep the situation as safe as we could while also caring for the dogs. So I had happened to have kennel panels from my old trading facility, and I was able to set up a modular 5x10, and we bracketed it into whatever wood and sturdy studs into the walls. And then I did a 5x5 for the two most. So there was a pair that were together. So they went in a 5x10 with like a panel shift in between. And then we had a 5x5. So we got all the crates, all the dogs out of the wire crates that they were breaking out of anyway. But then we still had the other dogs. None of them vaccinated. So anyway, so this ended up turning into a disaster over the next couple days because I was trying to implement safety. Didn't have any volunteers to come take care of them. I didn't feel safe with people handling them. The animal control officer was completely overwhelmed. The poor woman who's basically this was completely overwhelmed. Our local humane society initially offered to take only 2 of them, and they had one had a really old medical injury. There was another dog who had some medical issues, so they took 2 of them, but that still left us with 6 of the dog. And we had other random people who were just people that people are calling out to say, can you take this dog? Can you take this dog? And yeah, it's just really been a really hard, difficult thing. The state dumped this on the local animal control officer. I contacted our emergency response team that we have here, but they focus mostly just on disasters, and they need to be deployed through our Department of Agriculture and requested by them because that's what their MO or memorandum of understanding is with the Department of Ag and not with the state police or the game wardens. So the Humane Society was not able to send folks out or really assist right away. And then trying to coordinate with them just wasn't working out. In the meantime, the two dogs, right, who were the two that were together, separated, they were bad. Together, they were bad. We tried both. One of them specifically was actually even hurting himself even further on the kennel panels, right? So now we just got this dangerous situation, and it is now mostly resolved. But all of that would have been largely prevented with pre-planning. So by the time we've got so many people involved, we're triaging, we're troubleshooting on site. We don't have the proper equipment right away. We didn't have that communication up front. We've got people who have other things in their outside lives that they have not planned to move off to the side. So basically, this became pretty much a full-time job for me for a few days. The animal officer, he didn't even have crates appropriate to transport the dogs. He was driving to different sheriff's offices to like get the crate that each sheriff's office has locally in an airline crate because we were worried about putting them into fire crates to transport the two sick ones to the Humane Society because again, still all of them were kind of doing this alligator rolling. So it was just a lot of unpreparedness. So what I was thinking today, so that's the story. That's how we got here. And even that very abbreviated version took almost 15 minutes. What I wanted to talk about is like how can we prevent this, even if we are not a shelter who has a disaster response or a cruelty response team, and that is left to our local wardens or it's left to our animal trusters or nonprofit organizations as the local go-to shelter or organization or agency. What we need to do is make sure we are preparing for these types of situations and having a plan thought out ahead of time. I think that this was done very quickly due to the weather conditions, but the conditions of the dogs had been known about for quite some time. And so waiting until there's only an hour's notice, these 8 very under-socialized German Shepherds from outdoor enclosures, they've lived in their whole life is really just not the most strategic way to go about it. So what can we do different in the future? Not just here in Vermont, which is a uh, bigger picture challenge, but even at our own local shelters and humane societies throughout the United States. So when I'm working in these types of situations and we want to think about the preparedness for it, let's break it down into a couple different categories. So we need to think about all those daily care pieces. So when you're at your shelter, or even in your rescue and you're fostering dogs frequently, you kind of have a running list of supplies that you're not even really thinking about because they're just there and they exist in that space. And then you order new ones because you've already kind of had these systems put in place. When we get into an emergency type response situation, we all of a sudden realize I don't have the mop bucket. I don't have a disinfectant that is going to be enough to kill parasitic elements or viruses, right? We don't necessarily have that on hand. How are we going to feed these dogs that keep throwing their food everywhere? Or in this case, it was the dogs were knocking they were in 3x4 kennels and they were knocking their water bowls everywhere. Panicking and stressed. And so they didn't have access to water, which, as we know, is like one of the 3 basic core functions of survival is shelter, food, water, right? So we need to kind of consider what are these items that we take for granted in a way on our daily operations. So really quickly, if we're putting together a prep response, so this could be in toters, you could just have this stuff set aside, or you could just, if you have your own shelter where you just kind of have it all available, but you don't necessarily need to prep it, is even just creating a list of like emergency response supplies list. And on that, I would include your disinfectant. We want to include garbage bags. We want to include towels. We want to include blankets for sure. Additionally, for comfort, we can also sometimes use blankets or shower curtains to cover kennels, to stop dogs from being reacted to each other, or even sometimes cats if you have them in a similar space. We want to make sure that we also have, if we are going to bring these animals to a space that has a porous floor, like dirt, or maybe even it is like a concrete floor. And these dogs, if we're talking pet dogs, it's a little different. Like these guys are typically potty trained and we can take them in and out, and they kind of are already on a schedule. So it can be a little bit different. But if we have dogs who are from some type of neglect or cruelty situation and all of them came in at once and it's chaos and we don't know when's the last time they ate, when they need to go to the bathroom, if they can go, if they can walk on leash, it's really good to have some shaving, like wood shavings available, so that you can just put that in a kennel. Not only does that create bedding for them, without worrying about giving them blankets that they might ingest, because we don't know these dogs and they're not pet dogs. And the shavings can, in addition to providing sanitary ways to clean, it can also provide the dogs with a way to stay warm, and have some bedding, and usually put like 1.5 to 2 inches, and they will throw that shitting everywhere. So yeah, the shavings rather. I'm sorry. So you're gonna have to clean a lot of shavings and it will get all over your clothes, but the dogs are nice, warm, safe, and comfortable. And it's sanitary because you can scoop the shavings and then clean the floor underneath. And it does absorb a lot of the urine. And fecal matter. So that is something definitely very helpful. And to that specifically is you need to make sure that on standby somewhere, whether it's on site or maybe you have a storage place, is you need to definitely have varying size crates. And then we need to have an idea for dogs that cannot go into your standard crate. So we're talking like extra large dogs if it's like Dane. In this case, we had like 70 to 80 pound German Shepherds, and they were hitting the top of probably what were extra large crates. So like if we have, yeah, I think that's probably about an extra large because you go XXL and that's more for the Danes. So right, so we're thinking about what other types of enclosures, and this is dog specific, not necessarily, but can we use to set up and keep these dogs safe? Dogs with bigger mouths, when they are panicking or when they are under socialized and are not used to being in confined spaces, or maybe they grew up in this confined space, but this is a new confined space, and that's not okay. They can get their mouths through, they can hurt themselves with just themselves and their own panic. In this case, my kennels that I do like to use because I've seen them be really reliable, their locking mechanism kind of sucks. They're strong, but they do need chains, because the bracket itself is kind of stupid. If I had more tools and more time to have prepared, I may have put a bracket on the top and the bottom because or even three. But in this case, the dogs were grabbing the kennel bars even after I got the 5x10 set up and like pulling the door in as hard as they could to where the brackets were starting to bend, right? So I was able to use some chains, like like chain link almost, really fit. You want to check the weight on how much weight pressure it can hold, and some carabiners. And so I was able to chain the doors so they weren't getting as flexed, and to get the dog to stop hurting his teeth, right? Because if they can pull the door and they're getting that biofeedback with the door pulling and they feel like they're winning, they're going to keep doing it. So after chaining them and really securing the door from being able to pull in, it decreased the want or need to do that. The whatever was rewarding for the dog is probably like the idea of like I'm going to escape at some point is probably the dog's train of thought. But what I was able to do was take like a Kong Wubba and put it right next to where the chain was on the door. So instead of the dog trying to grab the chain or grab the door, it started grabbing the corner of the door where the Kong Wubba was, and he could pull him out all day. And I didn't care because now he's not hurting his teeth, right? So even having had some of those random toys in my of Laurie's crazy emergency box, I was able to supplement and solve that situation. In an ideal world, I think I would have preferred realizing that dog severity until we could figure out a plan, was having, I don't know, a real kennel somewhere, not a modular one, but also we could have done like an impact crate or a Roughlin. You guys have seen those. Roughlin, he might have even been able to get out of, but like a much sturdier crate. That's a little extreme, and that's where the response and the emergent handling of situations like that is very important. And so we need to have those plans for these types where it's like this is actually just dangerous, not just for the people in this space. If this dog gets out, handling this dog, but also this poor dog is hurting himself and is put in this much panic. Do we have a chemical immobilization ability to sedate the dog and then transport it somewhere to a more secure location, right? Like there's all sorts of things that you would want to be thinking about. So if you do get the phone call where somebody's walked into a backyard, or maybe there's an arrest at a house and they go in the backyard and there's 15 Cane Corsos that are just hanging out outside in kennels, some co-house, some not, some skinny, some not. Like you want to think through these worst case scenarios, because what happens is what, like when we don't do that, is what happened to me this week. So all right, I digress. So we want the water buckets. So if they flip their water bowls over, we can still continue to feed them. I have sometimes, in some circumstances, even seen dogs like just tearing, like grabbing and pulling buckets. That didn't happen in this case, but I have seen that. And so for those dogs, what you can do is freeze ice blocks. And sometimes that will just leave a big puddle on the floor. And that's at least a way that you can get them some water. That's a pretty like more extended version of when we need to kind of triage stuff, but that's an idea. Let's see who else. Oh, so when we have cats, what I was going to say is those modular panel setups are actually really great for cats, especially if you can co-house. But so if you take, I don't know, let's say you're on a scene or some situation where there's like 10 cats in this room and 5 cats in that room and this or that, you can actually build out those modular panels and then create a roof over the top of them. And then they can all live just in the units that they were already in, like in these areas. And then we want to eventually like triage and isolate and quarantine and et cetera. But at least we can get them from point A to point B in a space that is at least with the ones they were housed with. For these German Shepherds, particularly, was really hard because I think they had all lived together in the same space for a long time. And so when their whole situation got disrupted, it was really challenging because they could all see each other, but the situation was different. So even just the fact that they were all still together, there was some comfort in that. They actually howled when we left that night, the first night, and then subsequent times when we would be leaving, they would all start howling together. And that's pretty typical from what I've seen in some of these situations. Is they are all bonded in this weird screwed up way. But now that they're in a different context, even though they're all together, it's still very stressful. And so if we can at least do that and try to keep the ones that were close to each other on scene together, as long as, it wasn't like they were trying like hated each other, which I have also seen, but more commonly these dogs or cats even get used to being with the people, the other animals they know. So if we can carry that level of comfort over, that in itself helps reduce some stress. So for cats, the modular kennels are really cool because you can take things like milk crates to build perches and just zip tie them to the edges of the kennel, and you can put a bunch of litter boxes into the bottom, like 3 or 4. And you can just, let's see, there's a lot of really cool stuff we did. But generally, like you could set up a really quick patio, essentially, like in an emergency shelter that is pretty great for the cats and allows them the room. And we can triage their behavior a little bit better instead of them being all in like feral boxes or stuck in like a kennel or stacked in crates, etc. Ferret cages are obviously a little bit better and give the cats more climbing height. Blankets over them, of course. But yeah, I love using those panels for that for cats because it does allow to give them a lot more space, which I mean, dogs need it too, but cats really need to have it. Like you can put a milk crate and then hang a sheet in front of the milk crate, and a cat can kind of jump up and get behind the sheet on the milk crate and they can height seek, and that's just really good for them. Luckily, there was no cats with these German Shepherds. Some other supplies you're going to want to have ahead of time is a variety of leashes and slip leads. So for pet dogs, we don't really need anything too crazy. You might want to have a couple safety tools. Always have like a catch pole, right? Like you never know when things are going to go down, but having that is really important. And then the next thing you want to thinking about as far as cleaning and daily care is having some sheets that are already pre-printed, or you can print really quickly on the fly, of bathroom habits, feeding habits, and maybe some behavioral stuff, which again is like, as we've talked about through a lot of my lives, is it's really important to start documenting behavior immediately so we can establish a baseline. Even in an emergency situation like what I just went through, where it was really hard to even get, like their behavior was changing basically by the minute based on like having to move dogs. Oh, now we're building a 5x10 in the middle of this chaos, or now we're doing this or that. It's still kind of good to see if we can start tracking trends. And if the dog was all over the place while all the initial chaos was happening, then even keels out. It's really good to know that. Or maybe it's just really good to know is like, did they bounce back? Did it take them a few days to bounce back? Like, how are they adapting to these changes, especially in probably what is the most stressful, traumatic few days of their life, right? Especially again from these cruelty cases. But even dogs and cats coming from disasters, they may have been like shoved into a crate or carrier that they hadn't been in since last time they were at the vet, right? The previous association of those things are probably going to the vet, right? So that's really stressful. And then they don't go to the vet. They end up at a place with all these other animals. So just, even in disaster responses, like starting to track that behavior stuff. If it's a really big disaster and you're going to end up holding the animals for quite some time while the state or county or whatever get their stuff together, you can kind of start making adjustments either to their environment or their feeding routines or enrichment that can really help support them having a scheduled routine to help make them feel a little bit like their life is slightly more predictable. I think we all understand what it's like when things feel unpredictable. It's like an intermittent reinforcement ratio. As we go down and bring it down to behavioral science, the intermittent reinforcement of something bad happening really puts us all on edge or not knowing when something's going to happen. We all like to have that control or feeling of control. So creating that routine for them is going to be really important. And when you can get those daily care sheets, you can get a whiteboard if you don't have sheets, and then just mark whether they ate or they went to the bathroom, if there's any behavior observations, and then if they had their enrichment or not. That's really important stuff. And if you don't have sleeves, clipboards, or a whiteboard, you can just maybe get a manila folder and keep everything in one place. Really, really important. So in the event of like a cruelty response, there's just a couple more things that are a little more niche, but we should have on hand to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. So, like I said, a plan for chemical mobilization. So if we're in a cruelty scenario and a dog needs to be sedated really, really fast and can't be touched, that is going to be something that's going to be very helpful for your team in order to move the dog or um, get that dog to a next appropriate location. We want to make sure that we have those things ready and on the fly. Or if a really dangerous dog breaks out of a kennel, if we're in the middle of moving them from A to B, what have you, that can be really important to have. We want to make sure that if we are doing a cruelty and response case, whatever kennel structures that we have are secure. We do not want to use wire crates. We do not want to use regular airline crates. We want to have something that is a lot more secure. And we want to make sure that there's tops on those and that those are also secure. These dogs are having probably the worst day of their life. And we would think it's all medically, like there's a lot of things that are obviously worse, right? Like we're typically taking these dogs from bad situations, but I think what people need to realize is even if they don't have a lot, it's all they know. And it is what they've been living in and it's what they've been used to. And even though we're working on getting them to a better place, the act of getting them from A to B can be very, very traumatic. And I think that gets lost in the shuffle sometimes. Yeah, Trish. So the locks and carabiners, right? I usually just have a million carabiners. Zip tie carabiners I can make and a modular panel system, and I can basically make anything. So thank you, Trish. Yeah. Um, the zip ties, you can take the zip ties and then use carabiners, and if you want to put the dog supplies in the front of their kennel, as long as they're not trying to eat everything, you can then put that on the front of their kennel, and in there you can put their leash, their daily care sheet, a couple toys to rotate through, and you can put one of those on every kennel. Obviously, like depending on the type of modular kennel you have, you might want to have chains and carabiners so you can just chain the doors to make sure the dogs can't open them. Yeah, so there's just lots of things that we should be doing to think about those containment. And then when we talk about how to help these dogs with the decompression, we should just have a couple boxes of Kongs available. And just lots of peanut butter or other things. We want to have these ahead of time so we're not hodgepodging it, right? We want to make sure that we can just say, okay, here's a list of things we need. Let's say we have 30 dogs, we want 60 Kongs because we can prep today's or we can distribute today's and then prep for tomorrow. And then when we do cleaning, we can pull the ones prep for the next day, etc. So we can constantly have a rotation. Same for cats, cat enrichment too, bottle caps, whatever. And these are items that I typically, yeah, frizzies with frozen peanut butters are really good. And those don't take up a ton of space in freezers. So if you only have like a human freezer that's like big, the frizzies are actually really great and can be clipped to the outside of the kennel. And the reason the enrichment is important is not only for the dog's mental health and well-being, but if we have and I was going to say additionally, especially for larger dogs, are chew toys. We have bully sticks, pig's ears, something that they can chew and get into easily. So when we come in the morning to do daily care routine cleaning and those dogs are like, what is going on? And they're freaking out. We could say, here, have a bully stick. We're going to go around and like sweep and mop this area really quick and then leave, right? Or we need to move a couple dogs out for rotations, whatever. Like we can distribute things that can hopefully keep those dogs focused. And then additionally to that, movable barriers. They're really easy to make with PVC piping. You can, when you make them with PVC pipe, you can actually pull the legs out and store those separately. So when you store them somewhere, they're like up against the wall and maybe only take up like a foot and a half of space off the wall, and then you keep the legs in like a box. And then that way, if you're cleaning one dog's kennel and he's really doesn't, or moving a dog and whatever, that dog can be moved past really easily. And additionally, what you could do is like an X pen across the center if you have dogs facing each other, and then blankets over that. May not be a full barrier, especially if you're dealing with like extra large dogs, but in certain situations, if you have medium to large dogs, an X pen as a visual barrier down the middle of the row can be very helpful. What can be sort of dangerous about that is then we have to be really mindful when we're taking the dogs out if they're a little wily on leash and they hit the X pen and the whole thing folds over it, those types of things. So whenever there's a solution, what I've learned is there's also a problem on the other side. So when you're utilizing these things, you just want to think about that. So that's like all of the things that we're thinking about as far as daily care documentation. Of course, the other things that we want to think about are going to be on the medical side. That is where I have less experience. As you guys know, I'm a behavior person, a sheltering person. I did not come from a medical background, but that's where you want to also make sure you're coordinating with a medical team. Like, what vaccinations do these dogs need? What vaccinations do these dogs have? What happened in this situation is they numbered all the dogs on scene, and then they called somebody again last minute to come up, and then they vaccinated three of the dogs and then realized they couldn't vaccinate the rest of them. But somehow, like, when they numbered the dogs, they didn't put any identifying markers on them. So we just got 3 pages of vaccine and numbers for dogs that we didn't have any idea of which dog was which. Like one of them had a collar on and it said like dog with red collar was one. So making sure that your vet paperwork is aligned because then when we're going now to go vaccinate these dogs, none of them had rabies. It was just somebody that was not a vet doing distemper vaccinations, I think, which I understand. They were like, we have to find fosters to these dogs. I'm not in Vermont. A veterinarian has to administer rabies. So they were probably trying to just get as much vaccination to the dogs before they realized they were out of hand. It was out like they couldn't. And then in that situation, because the paperwork wasn't labeled well, we didn't know which dogs were vaccinated or not, and we don't want to double dose. So there were some issues with that as well. So I'm trying to figure that out as much as I can. But what is really nice for me is this is now we're beyond the urgent situation, and it is now a contained, safe situation. And now all of the other pieces that were missing for the last 5 days are kind of coming together, and I'm passing my hat over to other parties who are now willing to step in and kind of figure out what to do with the dogs from here now that it is not a dangerous situation anymore for the dogs or the people. But this took days of my life and a lot of my professional tools. I had to call in expert help from my partner and his quick building. I could have built the panels, but I needed to handle the dogs, right? So I needed a body double, and he did a great job. Tyler is amazing. And then I needed other handlers. The woman at this facility is kind as can be, does not have professional level handling. I had to call people to come up and help me with this over the past 2 days. Because people are working and have things to do. And even though, like, I had people who I knew had experience want to come help, they like couldn't leave their job or whatever, so I had to call people that I could pull from their other responsibilities. And I am wanting to pay them. I have submitted an invoice to the state. We will see what happens with that since there was no official chain of command established. I basically became an unofficial type of incident commander with no ability to talk to or coordinate with like the wardens, the humane, like there was just so much going on that I didn't even really have time to stop and try to talk to people. And I did reach out to a couple different organizations, and they all kind of pointed to the other organizations, which again speaks to needing to have some partnerships already established. I went to a really, really cool, and I think I'll end on this because I think it's really positive, and this is not something I have done, but I did go to a really awesome presentation by the San Diego Humane Society's hoarding and animal cruelty manager. He did a presentation specific on animal hoarding. And what they did in San Diego County was for like built a team that meets quarterly, I think, and has MOUs and partnerships written up between mental health services, the San Diego Humane Society, the police and law enforcement agencies in the various towns and areas. And they meet quarterly to make sure like, are our systems working? Who's in charge? You know, like people come in and out of roles. So like, who is the point person? How do we define what's a mental health issue versus a law enforcement issue? What are preemptive steps if there is a person who is hoarding animals and unwilling to relinquish, and we want to maybe help support them and build a rapport and a relationship, because that's always step one. Any organization taking multiple animals off of a property is going to be cumbersome. It's going to be hard. Oftentimes the animals are traumatized. Moving them is actually really traumatizing. And sometimes, despite the fact we want to save them, it is better for them to stay where they are, build a relationship with the person, get the animals that are on the property spayed and neutered, have them form some type of agreement that they are going to try to work with friends, neighbors, and whatever, or maybe a specific rescue or shelter to offload some of the dogs or cats like over a set period of time instead of all at once. And then leave them with their favorites or encourage them or get some type of civil document saying like I don't want to give my animals away, but I promise I won't get any more. And then there has to be some type of like law enforcement follow up and follow through, right? So that's the secondary piece is like who is going out and following up on all of this. And that's why they have these meetings quarterly or whatever. But they said that they've been able to get a lot of statistics and stuff, but it was cool. And it's really what's needed right now with our country and the crises we're in, the financial stuff that's going on, the drug addiction, the save them all. We like, I mean, 15, 20, 30 years ago, these animals would have just been destroyed or discharged in fields, right? And we are collectively as a country overall have decided that that is not appropriate anymore. Like, that's not what we want to do. But we haven't put plans in place on like what to do with these dogs that are certainly not pets. Maybe they could be pets with the right support or if done well, but when we go into these things without a plan, it just all falls apart. So I do think that this is a really great learning lesson for Vermont. I know that we have multiple people who are now aware of the situation and are trying to figure out what to do now. But I think that I'm grateful I was here for my community and I'm grateful I happened to have this experience, this tools, uh the live a mile and a half down the road. So it wasn't like far for me. I could jump in to help. I immediately recognized the severity of the situation, but I can't imagine what it would have looked like if I wasn't here. I don't even think I can imagine what my local humane society would have done because they don't have they just got some really awesome bite handling gloves, but they don't have like Y poles. They have a catch pole or two. They don't have restraint cages. They don't have transfer cages. I think their trap was stolen a couple years ago and hasn't been replaced. So to handle dogs of this severe behavioral velocity and trauma and adrenaline, and trying to handle and do that. Like, I don't even think we have those tools, and certainly none of our local animal control do. So I think it's a good wake up call for the state of Vermont. I know that this is not the first situation that has happened like this in Vermont this year, like actively this year, but even going back into next year. And this one just happened to happen near me. So I was the fortunate one whose lap it landed on. But there are other people like me in Vermont who have a lot of skills, who have a lot of experience. Like my colleague Emily, she's down about 2 hours for me. They had a situation like this about an hour south of her where it was like a bunch of dogs. So for Vermont, this is, I think, something happening more frequently and it's a big wake up call, but it is not obviously something that just happens here. I've done different responses and mostly my cruelty response has actually been secondary. What for the longest time was deploying out to the response center. So the animals would come into us and then we would triage them coming off the transport trucks and kind of go from there. I have very little, I shouldn't say that. I have a decent amount of like my own stuff. Like I did have to go into a house one time and break dogs out that were like left behind after a fire. That was like 12 years and like get them out of the house because they had been left behind by the owners because the animal control refused to take them in. That was a whole nother story. That was in Danbury, Connecticut. I'll never forgive the animal control officer leaving those dogs behind because he had a beef with the guy who owned them. It was a mess. Anyway, like these are the situations where we feel like sometimes it's very frustrating, but like these things just happen and we should have, if not, we should think about MOUs. We should think about our local partnerships. We should think about emergency response, if not like a supply closet that just has these things available, at least like a spreadsheet that you talk through with your team and be like, if this situation occurred, what would we need? And then have that. So even if you don't physically have these materials, a volunteer or a donor can say, what is it that you need? And you can say, I need you to go to Petco and purchase all these things. Or I need you to go to Agway and we need 15 water buckets, right? Like you have that list already there because when you're in that chaos, being like, oh shit, we need one of these, we need one of these. It's really hard. And that's what I did over the last few days. So now I am going to put my own list together. So I have one for myself in case this ever happens again, that I don't have to triage what's happening and also what we need to make sure that we can then take care of what's happening, right? Like that's the whole thing. So learning lesson for me, learning lesson for Vermont. I hope a learning lesson for you. And I am really looking forward to coming back in 2 weeks and talking about play groups. And then I don't even remember what next week's is, but I'm sure it's going to be awesome too. I've been trying to get my colleague Emily to come on here with me like once a month, and we were supposed to do that today, but she ended up coming up and helping me, and she's dealing with like some of the dog stuff right now. So um, we move onward and upward. When we know better, we do better. And I hope that this experience that I had is something you can utilize and think about to make your shelter and animal welfare systems better where you live. So, all right, I got to go to dentist now. So I'll check you guys later. Have a great and wonderful rest of your day and a good weekend. Bye-bye.